Our first reading today is taken from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 26, verses 16 to 19. In these verses, Moses exhorts the people to obey the commands of the Lord. However, Moses is very clear that the commands must be obeyed with all your heart and with all your spirit. Unfortunately, the people obeyed the commandments, but most of them obeyed them only externally. The externals took precedence over what was in the heart. And so, the Sabbath, which was meant to be a day which was given to rest from all one's labor, became an end in itself. And fasting, which was meant to reach God, became an end in itself and became something which people would do to show to others that they were righteous and pious. And almsgiving became ostentatious, and prayer became wordy and verbal and showy. And that is why in the gospel text of today, which is taken from the gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 43 to 48, and is part of Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, Jesus intends to bring back the following of the law like Moses intended before him to an internal observance as well. External actions are important, and so many do them. But what is more important than the external action is the internal disposition from which my actions flow. And that is why in the gospel text of today, Jesus says how it was said in the old that we must love only neighbor. And Jesus says, no. You cannot merely love your neighbor. If you are to be a son or daughter of God, you are to love everyone. And the love which you have must not be a love which is barter exchange. Barter exchange means trade. We go to traders to do barter exchange. We go to the mall or we go to the supermarket for barter exchange. But when we deal with people, whether it is the members of our family, whether it is outsiders, whether it is relatives, whether it is friends, there cannot be barter exchange. There cannot be in love. You give me and I give you. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. If you give me something, I will give you something in return. That is not called love. And Jesus says that everyone is doing this. Dealing in barter exchange, dealing in giving and taking, but that is not what he calls the disciples to do. He calls his disciples to genuinely love with no expectation whatever. True love, if it has to be called love, is unconditional and keeps no record at all. In the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, verses 4 to 8, Paul gives us a very, very beautiful definition of love. My own definition of love is very simple. In it I say, in love, there is no I. There's an L as we write it in English, and an O, and a B, and an E, but there is no I. Jesus ends the gospel text of today in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48, when he exhorts us, when he challenges us through these words, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And when we read this verse, when we read these words, we ask ourselves, how is it possible for us to be as perfect as God? Because God is God. So what does Jesus mean when he says, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect? The word perfect comes from the Greek teleos. And the word teleos has to be translated undivided in love. So what Jesus is saying, like the Father loves unconditionally, like the Father is undivided in His love for you, so you must love unconditionally and be undivided in your love for everyone. When was the last time you performed an action with no expectation whatever? Will you attempt to perform 3 such actions today?